grandfather passed away, his will was simple. No complicated trusts or confusing clauses, just one line that carried more weight than any vault of gold. The mountain parcel, untouched and free, belongs to my grandson. That land, nearly 50 acres of rolling hills, oak groves, and a wide clearing with a view that could take your breath away, had always been his pride. He'd kept it wild on purpose, never allowing developers to sink their claws into it, never fencing it off or chopping it into lots, because he said the land was more valuable free than chained. When the papers were signed and the deed was transferred, I drove up one evening to walk the boundary lines, boots crunching through dry leaves, the late sun staining the ridges copper, and I felt the kind of peace that only comes when you realize you've inherited not just property, but legacy. That night, I promised myself I'd honor it the same way he had. Leave it alone, keep it untouched, maybe someday build a quiet retreat cabin, but nothing more. And that's why I was stunned weeks later when, driving by after work, I saw survey flags staked in the soil, heavy machinery parked in the clearing, and men in hard hats laying out blueprints on the hood of a truck. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, a logging company or utility work, but then I saw her, Karen, the HOA president from down the road, standing in high heels on my land like a queen surveying her kingdom, sunglasses perched on her face and a clipboard clutched tight. She was barking orders, telling the foreman where to dig, pointing at the hillside as though it were her private playground. I parked and walked straight over, deed in hand, ready to correct what I assumed was a simple error. "This land isn't yours," I said evenly when I reached her, holding up the documents. "It's mine, inherited from my grandfather." She didn't even flinch. She tilted her head, gave me one of those tight smiles, and said, "That's cute, but this parcel was abandoned for decades. The HOA board voted to annex it into the community 2 years ago. You'll find I've already followed plans for my villa here." I laughed at the audacity, but she wasn't joking. She rattled off numbers, permits, contractors, budgets, acting like my grandfather's will meant nothing, like my deed was just paper she could override with her clipboard. I told her point blank she was trespassing, that everything she was building was on my land, and that I could shut it down with one call. That's when her smile sharpened into a sneer. "Go ahead," she said. "Call whoever you want. By the time you figure out how slow the courts move, my villa will be finished. And here's the thing about property law. You let me build it, and it becomes part of the land. You can try to fight me, but I'll bury you in litigation until you're broke. And when I'm done, I'll have this view, and you'll have nothing." Her arrogance was staggering, but as I looked at the steel beams already being lowered into place at the concrete trucks lining up at the road, I realized she wasn't bluffing. She was really going to do it, spend millions erecting her dream palace on land that wasn't hers, gambling that I'd be too weak, too slow, too intimidated to stop her. And in that moment, I made a choice. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply tucked the deed back into my jacket, gave her a long look, and said, "Build whatever you want, Karen. When you're finished, we'll see who it belongs to." Then I turned and walked away, leaving her smirk frozen in place, because while she thought she had outplayed me, she had no idea she had just walked into the biggest trap of her life. I would let her build her $6 million villa, stone by stone, chandelier by chandelier, and when the last nail was hammered, I'd take it all back with one piece of paper she could never erase. Over the next several months, my land transformed in ways that were both awe-inspiring and infuriating. Each time I drove past the clearing, the sound of machinery echoed off the hills, the earth rumbled under the weight of bulldozers, and the scent of fresh-cut timber and wet concrete filled the air. What had once been a quiet sanctuary of oak and pine was now a construction site, buzzing with dozens of workers, all under Karen's command. She strutted around in tailored outfits like a monarch surveying her kingdom, barking at contractors, waving her clipboard like it was a royal scepter, and bragging loudly about her villa to anyone who would listen. I'd catch glimpses of her SUV parked at the site almost daily, windows tinted, trunk stuffed with fabric swatches, imported tile samples, and glossy brochures for Italian chandeliers. To the casual observer, she was just another wealthy homeowner expanding her empire. But to me, every brick, every marble countertop, every imported window pane was a testament to her arrogance and an investment she was unknowingly making into my future. And the best part? She never once suspected that I was letting her bury herself deeper with every dollar spent. I made a habit of documenting everything. Every time I stopped by, I snapped photos of the progress. The foundation being poured, the walls going up, the glass panels being fitted. I collected copies of permits from the county office, which, amusingly enough, all listed her name as applicant, but none with valid proof of land ownership. I even kept receipts from subcontractors who would casually mention the crazy HOA lady who's building a palace up on the ridge. She was building a paper trail for me without even knowing it. Meanwhile, she treated me like I was some harmless bystander she didn't need to worry about. Once, when I walked the property line to check the stakes, she spotted me from the porch frame and called out mockingly, "Better enjoy the view while you can, sweetheart. This is going to be the most exclusive house in the county, and you won't even be able to afford a tour ticket." Her arrogance was blinding, and the contractors ate it up, bowing to her every demand, even as she pushed deadlines, screamed about minor imperfections, and drove costs higher. $6 million, by my estimate, were sunk into that project. $6 million of her own money, not the HOA's, not some slush fund, her personal fortune. She'd mortgaged properties, liquidated assets, and leveraged loans to make this mansion her crowning jewel, the monument to her legacy. She even boasted about it at HOA meetings, which I occasionally attended just to see her puff herself up. She'd tell the board, "This villa will elevate all our property values, put our community on the map." What she didn't know, and what made me nearly laugh out loud, was that every penny she poured into this palace only strengthened my claim. She wasn't building on community land. She wasn't building on some annexed parcel. She was building on a deeded inheritance that bore my name in bold letters. And the law, unlike her smug confidence, was on my side. I spent evenings studying property statutes, consulting quietly with a real estate attorney who couldn't believe the stupidity of what she was doing. You're telling me she's constructing a multi-million-dollar residence on land she doesn't own with permits that never referenced you as the deed holder? He asked, eyes wide in disbelief. She's digging her own grave. Don't stop her. Don't tip her off. Just let her finish. When it's done, you can file a quiet title action, and the court will recognize the structure as yours because it's affixed to your land. I nodded, almost savoring the delicious irony of it all. Every time Karen bragged about her infinity pool or her imported marble floors, I saw it not as her victory, but as an investment she was making into my future estate. I'd even drive up at night sometimes, parking just outside the worksite, headlights off, staring at the skeletal frame of what would soon become the crown jewel of my inheritance. The moonlight would catch the steel beams, casting long shadows across the land, and I'd smiled to myself, knowing the trap was closing tighter each day. But Karen, blinded by her obsession, never suspected a thing. She posted photos on social media, posing with champagne flutes in the unfinished great room, boasting about her vision. She invited HOA board members to tour the site, showing off the panoramic windows overlooking the valley, completely oblivious to the fact that she was parading them through my property. She was so consumed by her ego, so convinced she had steamrolled me into submission, that she never considered I might have a long game of my own. And so, I waited, patient and silent, while she piled millions into her monument of hubris, never once realizing that the keys she would one day hold wouldn't open her door, but mine. The day the villa was finally finished was unlike anything I had ever seen, because what had once been my grandfather's quiet land was now dominated by a $6 million palace that gleamed under the sun like a monument to arrogance. And Karen, dressed in designer clothes and sunglasses, threw herself a ribbon-cutting ceremony with golden scissors, champagne bottles, and a crowd of HOA members, neighbors, and even a local news crew she had bribed to film her moment of triumph. And while she boasted on camera about her vision and how she had elevated property values, I stood quietly in the crowd, clapping like everyone else, hiding the grin tugging at my lips, because I knew her empire was seconds away from collapse. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, I filed the quiet title action with my attorney, a simple stack of papers backed with months of documentation proving the land was mine, the deed ironclad, the annexation fake, and suddenly her entire fantasy cracked open like glass, the summons delivered to her doorstep, wiping the smug smile off her face as panic replaced pride, her late-night phone calls to lawyers filled with desperation, her HOA cronies suddenly distant as they realized she had built on land she did not own. And when the court date arrived, she strutted in as if she still held power. But the judge barely looked at her before holding up my deed, signed decades earlier by my grandfather, and declared the law unambiguous. The land was mine, the villa was affixed to it, and therefore, the villa was mine too. And as the gavel struck and Karen's jaw dropped, her arguments about fairness silenced, she realized in one crushing moment that she had handed me a $6 million gift. And yet her downfall didn't end in the courtroom, because she refused to leave, barricading herself inside what she still called her house, forcing the sheriff's department to arrive with cruisers and flashing lights, deputies stepping out with a court order in hand, neighbors gathering at the gates to witness the collapse of the HOA queen. And when Karen appeared on the balcony in a robe, screaming about persecution and betrayal, the deputies remained calm, informing her she was now trespassing on private property. And the irony of it all was almost too perfect, as they escorted her down the grand staircase in handcuffs, cameras flashing, phones recording. And when she locked eyes with me and hissed, "You planned this," I leaned close enough for only her to hear and whispered, "You built it, I claimed it. That's how the law works." And the fury in her eyes was drowned by the flashing red and blue lights of the cruiser that carried her away, leaving me standing at the edge of the infinity pool as the valley stretched below, realizing that what Karen thought was her ultimate victory had been her undoing all along, because she had built herself a palace, but she had built me a kingdom. Owning that villa felt surreal at first, like stepping into someone else's dream. The kind of dream you don't fully trust until you touch the walls and hear the echo of your own footsteps on marble that cost more than most people's yearly salary. And as I walked through the grand foyer for the first time without Karen's smug face shadowing me, I couldn't help but marvel at the sheer insanity of it all, that a woman so arrogant, so blinded by her own hunger for control, had essentially gift-wrapped me a $6 million palace built on the very land she tried to steal. And now every chandelier, every imported tile, every piece of extravagant architecture was mine. By law, secured not through tricks or deception, but through patience, diligence, and the strength of a deed signed decades earlier by my grandfather, whose legacy she had mocked. And with the sheriff's deputies standing by as I changed the locks, ensuring her keys would never again open these doors, I realized that Karen's empire had collapsed in the most poetic way imaginable, destroyed not by violence or force, but by her own hubris, by her refusal to see that the law, no matter how slowly it moves, will always catch up with those who think they are above it. And as I secured the gates and walked the grounds, past the infinity pool she bragged about, the Spanish fountains she had shipped at absurd cost, the manicured terraces designed to impress politicians and board members, I couldn't stop thinking that this land, once meant to stay wild, had been forced into bearing her arrogance, but now stood free again, mine to shape, mine to protect. And though I considered tearing the gaudy monstrosity down to honor my grandfather's wishes, I chose instead to give it a purpose she never could have imagined, converting parts of it into a retreat center for veterans, artists and students, opening its doors to those who needed peace and inspiration instead of locking it away as a monument to ego. And each time people walked those polished halls or stood in awe at the valley view, I knew I had reclaimed the land, but also its soul, while Karen, stripped of her illusion of power, faced the consequences of her arrogance, her reputation destroyed as news outlets across the state splashed her downfall on headlines. HOA president builds $6 million villa on wrong land, loses everything, her allies abandoning her as quickly as they had once cheered her on, the HOA board crumbling in chaos as neighbors shouted at meetings, some demanding resignations, others mocking her, and through it all, Karen herself, once the queen of the community, became a pariah, bankrupted by the loan she took to fund her vanity project, her properties repossessed, her retirement gutted, her name forever stained by the image of deputies escorting her in handcuffs from the very house she thought she had conquered, while I, the man she underestimated, stood as proof that arrogance has a price, and that the law, when wielded with patience and precision, can topple even the most tyrannical of HOA queens. And though part of me savored the victory, the greater part felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice wasn't just about winning property or wealth, but about restoring balance, about honoring my grandfather's legacy, about ensuring that land remains in the hands of those who respect it, not those who exploit it. And so when I stood at the edge of the property one evening, the sun sinking low, painting the villa's stone walls gold, I whispered a thank you into the mountain air. A thank you to the man who entrusted me with this land, who unknowingly gave me the strength to outlast Karen's games. And as the night settled in, I locked the gates behind me, the clang of iron echoing like a closing chapter, certain of one thing above all else. Karen had built herself a palace, but in the end, she had built me a kingdom.